It's Sunday, and man, we sure are getting close to the season. Sundays during the season. Saturdays are great. I guess Saturday is the best day of the week during the college football season. I guess it's hard to argue that. But man, Sunday sure is the second best day, isn't it? Yeah. Unless you're brand new to this channel. Then, of course, you know we're talking about the Your Season is Over videos, which will be starting soon. That's not what today is. Nebraska, your season's not quite over yet, is it? No. This one surprised me. I'm going to be honest with you. When I made that video yesterday morning, asking y'all to let me know which teams you wanted me to talk about, and then hit thumbs up on those comments and I would make videos on the highest thumbed up teams or whatever. Right after I made that video, if you'd asked me to make a list of 10 or 15 teams that I thought would be the highest on that list, Nebraska would have been nowhere near there. But let's be honest, Nebraska really ain't got no business being anywhere near any top 15 list imaginable right now. But for whatever reason, an overwhelming number of you want to hear Uncle Lou talk about Nebraska, so that's what we're going to do in today's video. Nebraska, of course, in the Big Ten West. It has just been absolutely abysmal going on 7-8 years now. They haven't even made a bowl game since Obama was president. Is that true? Wow. That's unbelievable. That seems like a lifetime ago. Scott Frost came in, white horse, supposed to save the day. Absolute disaster and failure. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure why. Actually, I have an idea of why, and it's got a lot less to do with Scott Frost than some of you might think. I'm not convinced still that Scott Frost is a terrible coach. I'm not convinced. I'm going to have to see where, how he does going forward now. I'm not so sure in today's college football that failing miserably at Nebraska is necessarily an indication that you're not a very good coach. It could be that nobody can be a very good coach at Nebraska, and I guess that's kind of what I want to focus on with this video here. Now, let me start with some positive, because look, some teams are fun to make fun of. Some teams are fun to point and laugh at their negatives or sort of laugh about why they're not any good. I'm going to be honest, at least for me anyway, that's not the case with Nebraska. I don't get any pleasure and enjoyment out of Nebraska being bad. But the reality is they are bad. But let's start with a positive. They bring Matt Rule in, and I like Matt Rule. Anybody that's talking about what he did or didn't do with the Carolina Panthers is college football ignorant. college football head coach and NFL head coach are not similarly related jobs in any way, shape, or form. None. They might as well be two totally different occupations in two totally different lines of work. Being good at one has absolutely nothing to do with being good at the other, in my opinion. There are dozens of coaches who have transitioned from college to pro and failed. There are dozens of coaches who have transitioned from college to pro and succeeded, and vice versa. There is no indication one direction or the other that being good at one will make you good at the other, or that being bad at one would make you bad at the other. So I don't care how bad or what he did at Carolina. I am looking exclusively at what he did at Baylor, and it was a remarkable turnaround he had there. Baylor was worse, in my opinion. Baylor was worse when Matt Rule got there than Nebraska is even now. Now, Nebraska maybe has been bad longer than Baylor was at the time, but Baylor was coming off some scandal situations. They were basically a 1 or 2 win team. Nebraska hasn't been that bad yet. They've been close. I still can't believe they haven't made a bowl game. Was it 2015 or was it 2016? It's been a long time since Nebraska even made a bowl game. In fact, the last coach that made a bowl game for Nebraska was immediately fired. God. Nebraska has to be kicking themselves in their own ass for that, don't they? What was that coach's name? I can't even remember now. It was so long ago. He went like 9-4 or something like that, and they fired him. And ever since then, they can't even win 6 games. It's absolutely pitiful, piss poor, and pathetic. But Matt Rule is the latest hero here to save the day for the Cornhusker man. And like I said, I do like Matt Rule. And I do think he will have an immediate improvement on Nebraska. Now, little truth in advertising here. I said the same thing about Scott Frost. But like I mentioned earlier, I'm not convinced that was totally Scott Frost's fault. And we're going to find out here with Matt Rule. Because if Matt Rule shows up at Nebraska and can't win more than 5 or 6 games in a 3 or 4 year period, then a lot of people's theory, my own included, is going to be proven true beyond a shadow of a doubt. I don't know very many Nebraska fans. In fact, I might not know any personally. There has been some Nebraska fans on the channel over the years, but not a lot. But I'm not sure I know exactly what Nebraska fans' expectations are in current modern day football. Now, I realize that not making a bowl game is unacceptable, and it should be unacceptable for any fan of any Power 5 team. I've long said making a bowl game should be any team or any fan's bare minimum expectation. But I mean beyond that. I know there's a lot of people still alive, barely, who were alive when Nebraska was probably the best football program in the country for a 3 or 4 or 5 year period in the early to mid to late 90s. Back-to-back national titles, and I still think that 1995 Nebraska team is the best team of my lifetime. I know a lot of, recency bias, and you got a lot of people that are 12 years old playing on the internet that it really ain't got no business being on the internet, but anyway, parents are using the internet as a substitute for parenting these days. But so you got a lot of 12-year-olds that, what about 2019 LSU? What about 2016 Clemson? What about them? They're really good. 95 Nebraska was better. I think 95 Nebraska is the best team of my lifetime. That Miami team from 2001, probably the second best. I would probably put the 2013 Florida State team in my top 5. All 22 starters from that team ended up being drafted. And then I would put the LSU team the 2019 LSU team would probably also be in my top 5. But it's too many people under the age of 20 running around talking about 2019 LSU greatest team ever. No, they're not the greatest team ever. They're a really good team. In 2020 Alabama, just get that completely out of the conversation. Nothing about 2020 is the best or worst of all time, period. It was half a season. Played with no non-con games in the regular season. Half the games were canceled. Half the players in the games that did get played didn't play. Players opting out 2 weeks before the season started. It was just an absolute mess of a season. Nothing that happened in 2020 is the best or the worst of anything of all time. So just the 2020 Alabama people are just out of their mind, which is a position they're used to being in, being out of their mind. But this is a Nebraska video, though. So I do think there will be some immediate improvement, and I think Nebraska can make a bowl game. It's not going to be it's not a guarantee, though. If you look at Nebraska's schedule, there's some good and there's some bad. Nebraska's in the Big Ten West, okay? So, of course, they play everybody over there. Well, that's the garbage can side of the Big Ten. It's just an absolute horror show on the Big Ten West. I mean, fucking Purdue won the damn SEC West last year, and they're horrendous. But they do have to play Michigan from the East. That's the bad news. Good news is they don't play Ohio State. They don't play Penn State. So of the three best teams in the conference, which are all in the Big Ten East, Nebraska only has to play one of them, and that's Michigan. More bad news, their first two games of the year are both against Power 5 teams, and they're both on the road. Weird scheduling quirk here. Their first game of the year is a conference game on the road at Minnesota. Not upper echelon of the Big Ten as a whole, but upper echelon of the Big Ten West currently. I've got some questions about them replacing the running back, but again, this is a Nebraska video. So you open up the season on a Thursday night on the road at Minnesota. I think at best for Nebraska, that's a toss-up game. Now look, Nebraska being, we got Scott Rule, we got this guy in the portal, and we got this and that. You're fucking Nebraska. A toss-up game on the road is about the best you can hope for, lady. I think that's a toss-up game. And then week 2 on the road at Colorado. Now, you get extra time to prepare for that. Will you need it? I don't know. Here's the deal. If you lose to Colorado, forget every positive outlook you had for the season. Colorado's horrendous, and if you can't go on the road and beat them there, you've got no business really even competing in the Power 5. And that's just honest truth right there on a Sunday morning for you there. They're horrible, and they're going to be horrible this year. If you start 1-1 with a loss to Minnesota and a win to Colorado, I think the season is still savable. I think you still can make a bowl game. But, man, you start looking at some of the games after that. You play two nobodies after that at home in the non-con, Northern Illinois or something, and Louisiana Tech. Two teams you should beat easily. Now, we said that about Georgia Southern, and you got humiliated. But, again, Matt Rule in, Scott Frost out, so we'll see. So I think you'll win those third and fourth games against the lower-tier competition. So I think, hoping for 3-1 at that point. But then you play, is it Illinois? I think you host Illinois. Anyway, I know you play Illinois. Not going to be easy. You play on the road at Wisconsin. You end the season with a game against Iowa. There's just some tough games. And the first half of the season is a lot more difficult than the second half, which is not ideal for a team with a brand new coaching staff and a lot of new players picked up through the portal. Teams like that, like Nebraska, tend to get better as the season goes along, as the players sort of start to pick up the new system. If I was a Nebraska fan and could handpick the schedule, I'd flip-flop it. I'd have some of those harder games maybe towards the back half of the schedule instead of the front half. But here's the thing with Nebraska. Does it really matter what they do this year? Because they're not winning 10 games. I don't even think there's a Nebraska fan around that's expecting that. So it's not like they're going to put together some miraculous run at the Big Ten or something like that. So I'm talking more going forward for Nebraska. I don't know that we're ever going to see Nebraska. I don't want to use the term relevant, but I don't know that we're ever going to see Nebraska be a top 10 program in college football ever again. The landscape of college football has changed so drastically since Nebraska was on top of the college football world, which was 30 years ago now, basically. I just don't know if Nebraska's in a position where they can get back to that for a couple of reasons. And one of them is just honestly where they're located. They're in the middle of absolute nowhere. I mean, if Lord of the Rings was a college football map, Middle Earth would be Nebraska. It's just the absolute middle of nowhere. I don't know of a human being in the history of mankind that has ever woke up in the morning, wiped the sleep out of their eyes, and said to themselves, I want to go to Nebraska today. I just don't think that happens. If I was a college baseball player, I'd tank the season just to avoid the College World Series. It's just not. I don't know. And people get mad when I sort of this on states or whatever. This has a football meaning, though. I just don't know of recruits growing up anymore thinking, man, if I can just put on another 10 pounds or shave another tenth of a second off my 40 time, maybe I'll get that scholarship offer from Nebraska. I just don't see that anymore. The landscape of college football has shifted to the point where I just don't know if Nebraska will ever be able to get back to sort of its heyday. Forget winning national titles. I'm talking about a 2 or 3 year period where Nebraska can finish in the top 10. I don't know that I'll ever see that again in my lifetime. They're recruiting a little bit better right now, 25-ish. I think they finished somewhere around 24, 25 in the last cycle, or somewhere around that now. Great. That puts you about 6th or 7th in the Big Ten, okay? And look at the teams that are ahead of you. It's teams that you are miles away from. Ohio State, Michigan, Southern Cal, Wisconsin. It's just not looking good, in my opinion, long-term for Nebraska in terms of getting back to what they were in the 90s. I don't see it happening. I would be absolutely shocked if at any point in the next 10 years, Nebraska finished in the top 10 2 years in a row. Anything can happen in a one-off year. Look at the final top 10 every single year in college football that you've been alive. You can find one team in that top 10 almost every single year where you go, my God, how did that happen, right? Then look at the top 10 the following year. You won't see that team there again. So is it possible Nebraska, through some sort of miracle or generational talent at quarterback by miracle, reels off some 10 or 11 win season and finishes somewhere in the top 10 at some point in the next decade? Yeah, that's possible. Is it possible it happens 2 or 3 years in a row? No, and they're not winning a national title. Ask yourself, ask yourself this. Which of these two scenarios do you think is more likely? Let's throw somebody else under the bus here while we're shitting on teams here. Which of the following two scenarios do you think is most likely? Do you think it's more likely that in the next 10 years, Nebraska gets to where Oklahoma is or was under Lincoln Riley? In other words, no national titles, but a lot of top 5 finishes, college football playoffs, conference championships, Heisman Trophy winners and contenders, but just not quite winning it all? Or do you think it's more likely that Oklahoma becomes what Nebraska has been for the last 10 years? Which is more likely? Does Nebraska raise to the level of Oklahoma over the last 10 years? Or does Oklahoma fall to the level of a Nebraska over the last 10 years in the next decade? I would argue it's more likely that Oklahoma winds up being like Nebraska than it is that Nebraska winds up being like Oklahoma, and it's for a lot of the same reasons. Landscapes have changed. There's not a lot of high school players sitting around trying to figure out how to get scholarships to Nebraska. Why? Middle of nowhere. Nebraska changes conferences. It never made sense to start with. They were Big 12. They went into Texas, did a lot of recruiting there. They played in Texas multiple times a year because they were in the Big 12. Left all that behind, go to the Big 10 just to get beat up on year in and year out. Hasn't worked out, hasn't helped the recruiting. Oklahoma could be staring down the barrel of that exact same gun moving to the SEC. Oklahoma is not going to be a better team year to year in the SEC than they were in the Big 12. That doesn't mean right now, as currently constituted, that Oklahoma can't reel off a really good season. Oklahoma is still a relevant team today in the world of college football. Yeah, they were terrible last year in Brent Venables' first year, but over the during the playoff era, didn't they make the playoffs 3 times? I know they never won a game. Lincoln Riley. But they're still considered relevant in today's college football by any measurement, right? I don't know how long that's going to last, especially if they have another bad year this year. So anyway, let's get off Oklahoma. I'm worried about the long-term health of Oklahoma. I'll just leave it at that. For the same reasons that Nebraska has been in the toilet the last 6 or 7 years. Location, no one wakes up trying to figure out how to get to Oklahoma. They're changing conferences in what appears to make little to no sense. Their schedule is going to become a lot more difficult than it was in their previous conference. Coaching changes that look like they might not work out, at least right now. Now, it's too early to judge Venables, but year 1 was a complete failure. One of the worst defenses in the Big 12. How's that, Bob? I don't know. Nebraska, Matt Rule, 2023. Haven't done a schedule prediction yet, but I've been saying for 6 months that my pick to win the Big Ten West is Wisconsin. So I don't think Nebraska's beating Wisconsin. They better beat Colorado. They better find a way to beat Colorado. I think Minnesota's a toss-up. I think they lose to Michigan. I think at best they probably split with Illinois and Iowa. And then who's left? Your Purdue's of the world. I mean, you got to start beating those teams on a regular basis if you want anybody to take you seriously. And I'm just not sure that they can, at least not this season. And like I said, if I was a betting man and you wanted to ask me how many times will Nebraska finish in the top 10 in the next decade, and I put the over-under at 1.5, I'll take the under.